At 3 a.m., my wife's father texted, "We know you spent $570,900 to Omicron save our company, but we don't want you at the company's investors party." I just replied, "Noted." That was the night they realized. I was done being taken for granted. What happened next shocked them. You know what they say about 3 a.m. texts? Nothing good ever comes after midnight. Well, whoever said that clearly never met my charming father-in-law, Raymond Holloway, because apparently he thought 3 a.m. was the perfect time to drop a nuclear bomb on what was left of our relationship. There I was, dead asleep in our ridiculously overpriced Houston townhouse. You know, the kind where the HOA fee costs more than most people's rent, when my phone decided to light up like a damn Christmas tree. The blue glow cut through the darkness like a laser, and for a split second, I thought maybe it was an emergency. Maybe someone was hurt. Maybe the world was ending. Turns out, it was just my dignity getting murdered in real time. The message was from Raymond Holloway himself. Not his secretary, not his assistant, not even his golden boy son Logan, who usually handles the family's dirty work. Nope, this came straight from the horse's mouth, and boy, did it pack a punch. "We know you spent $570,900 to save our company, but we don't want you at the company's investors party." I'm sitting here, rubbing my eyes like some kind of cartoon character, thinking maybe I'm having one of those weird stress dreams where your brain decides to torture you with the most ridiculous scenarios possible. But nope, there it was in crisp, clear text. Black letters on a white background, spelling out exactly how much the Holloway family valued my contribution to their precious little empire. Let me paint you a picture here, folks. I'm Grayson Wells, 36 years old, and I've been married into this circus of a family for 7 years now. 7 whole years. That's longer than most Hollywood marriages, and roughly 6 years longer than I should have put up with their bullshit. But hey, love makes you do stupid things, right? I built my own software firm from absolutely nothing. Started in my garage like some kind of tech stereotype, survived on ramen noodles and spite, and turned it into something actually profitable. Not Facebook money, but enough to buy a nice house, drive a decent car, and apparently bail out failing family businesses when the need arises. Because that's exactly what I did 2 years ago when the Holloway Group was circling the drain faster than a turd in a toilet bowl. Decades of what I can only describe as spectacularly bad management, vanity projects that made no sense, and leadership that couldn't find their way out of a paper bag had left them bleeding money like a stuck pig. But did they ask for help like normal people? Did they sit down and have an honest conversation about their financial troubles? Of course not. That would require admitting they screwed up, and God knows the Holloway family would rather eat glass than admit they're not business geniuses. Instead, my wife Camille came to me with tears in her eyes, talking about family legacy and how this company was her father's life work. "We're family," she said, like that magic word was supposed to make me forget that her father had never once treated me like anything more than an ATM with legs. So what did I do? Like the absolute sucker I apparently am, I liquidated my second home, sold off stock, basically cleaned out my savings account, and handed over $570,900 of my hard-earned money to save their sorry asses. I even threw in my CFO, Marla Simmons, as a bonus to help restructure their finances because apparently I'm not just generous, I'm stupid generous. And for a brief, shining moment, I was their hero. They called me a savior. Raymond actually shook my hand and looked me in the eye when he thanked me. Logan stopped treating me like furniture. Even Camille seemed proud to be married to the guy who swooped in and saved the day. But here's the thing about being a hero in someone else's story. They only appreciate you until they don't need you anymore. Once the company was stable again, once the money was flowing and the investors were happy, suddenly I wasn't the savior anymore. I was just the quiet guy in the corner who happened to have deep pockets. They started taking credit for the recovery. Raymond would tell people how his strategic vision turned things around. Logan bragged about his innovative leadership. And my contribution? Well, that got downgraded to helpful family support. Like I was some kind of cheerleader instead of the guy who literally kept them from going under. The worst part? Camille said nothing. Every time I brought it up, she'd give me that look. You know the one. And tell me I should let her father feel in control. She'd say it was important for Raymond's dignity, for the family dynamics, for a dozen other reasons that all boiled down to the same thing. Shut up and be grateful you're part of the family. So I did. I shut up. I smiled at family dinners. I nodded along when they talked about their brilliant business strategies. I played the role of the supportive son-in-law who was just happy to help. Until 3 a.m. on a random Tuesday when Raymond decided to remind me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. I stared at that message for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 seconds. My brain was trying to process the sheer audacity of it all. Here was a man who owed me more than $500,000, whose company would be a smoking crater if not for my intervention, telling me I wasn't welcome at their celebration party. The investors' party. The big shindig where they were going to pat themselves on the back for their amazing turnaround. The event where they'd probably give speeches about family strength and business acumen, while conveniently forgetting to mention the guy who actually wrote the checks that made it all possible. I could have written a novel in response. I could have listed every way they disrespected me, every slight, every moment when they treated me like hired help instead of family. I could have reminded him that without my money, there wouldn't be a company to celebrate. Instead, I typed one word: noted. Because sometimes, when someone shows you exactly who they are, the best response is to simply acknowledge that you've received the message loud and clear. And that was the moment, sitting in my overpriced bedroom at 3 a.m., staring at the most disrespectful text I'd ever received, that they lost access to something far more valuable than my money. They lost access to me. Game over, Holloways. You just played yourselves. All right, let me rewind this disaster movie and give you the full backstory, because trust me, you're going to need context to understand just how spectacularly the Holloway family managed to screw themselves over. Picture this. 2 years ago, the Holloway Group was basically the Titanic after it kissed that iceberg. And I'm not talking about a little love tap. I'm talking full-on, women and children first, band playing while the ship goes down kind of sinking. Decades of what I can only describe as weapons-grade stupidity had turned what was once a decent mid-sized logistics company into a financial black hole that would have made Bernie Madoff proud. Now, you might be wondering how a company that had been around for 30 years could suddenly find itself circling the drain. Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because this is a masterclass in how to destroy a family business through sheer incompetence and ego. It all started with Raymond's brilliant idea to diversify about 5 years back. Instead of sticking to what they knew, which was moving stuff from point A to point B without losing it, he decided they needed to be innovators. Because apparently, every successful business needs to reinvent the wheel, even when their current wheel was working just fine. First, they dumped a fortune into some kind of revolutionary tracking software that was supposed to compete with the big boys. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The damn thing couldn't track a pizza delivery, let alone manage complex supply chains. But did Raymond pull the plug when it became obvious they were throwing good money after bad? Of course not. That would require admitting he made a mistake, and we all know how the Holloway family feels about that. Then came the real estate venture. Because nothing says logistics expertise like flipping houses, right? They bought up a bunch of properties during a market peak, convinced they were going to be the next real estate moguls. The market crashed 6 months later, and suddenly they were sitting on a portfolio of underwater investments that were bleeding money faster than a stuck pig. But wait, there's more. Logan, Raymond's pride and joy, decided the company needed to go green and invested in an electric vehicle fleet before the infrastructure was ready to support it. Brilliant move, kiddo. Nothing quite like having a bunch of expensive electric trucks sitting in your lot, because there aren't enough charging stations to make them practical for long-haul routes. By the time I got the full picture of their finances, I felt like I was looking at a train wreck in slow motion. Every quarter brought new losses. Every month revealed another brilliant investment that had gone sideways. They were burning through cash like it was going out of style, and their credit was so shot they couldn't get a loan to buy office supplies, let alone fund operations. That's when Camille came to me with those big, sad eyes and started talking about family legacy. "Gray, you have to understand," she said, sitting on our couch like she was delivering a eulogy. "This company isn't just a business to my father. It's his entire identity. It's what my grandfather built, what Dad grew, what Logan was supposed to inherit. If it fails..." She didn't finish the sentence, but I got the picture. In her mind, letting the Holloway Group die would be like killing the family patriarch. Never mind that Raymond had been slowly poisoning the company for years with his vanity projects and ego-driven decisions. We're family, she continued, and there it was, the magic word that was supposed to make me forget about logic and financial sense. Please, Gray. This company is their legacy. I can't watch it all fall apart. Now, here's where I should have put on my big boy pants and explained some basic facts about throwing good money after bad. I should have pointed out that sometimes businesses fail, and that's not necessarily a tragedy. It's just economics. I should have suggested that maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't lack of capital, but fundamental management issues that no amount of money could fix. But did I do any of that? Hell no. Because apparently, when your wife looks at you with tears in her eyes and talks about family, all your business sense goes right out the window. So I became the cavalry. I sold my second home, a beautiful place in the mountains that I'd planned to retire to someday. Liquidated a chunk of my stock portfolio that had taken years to build. Cleaned out savings accounts and investment funds until I had assembled the princely sum of $570,900. Let me put that number in perspective for you. That wasn't just spare change I had lying around. That was real money. Life-changing money. Money that represented years of 14-hour days, missed vacations, and saying no to things I wanted so I could build something for the future. And I handed it over to save a company that was failing because of pure, unadulterated incompetence. But I didn't just throw money at the problem like some kind of lottery winner with more dollars than sense. Oh no, I went full rescue mode. I brought in Marla Simmons, my CFO, who's basically a financial surgeon. This woman can look at a balance sheet and spot problems like a hawk spotting a field mouse. Marla took one look at the Holloway Group's books and nearly had an aneurysm. Jesus Christ, Grayson, she said. This isn't a business, it's a money-burning competition. And they're winning. But being the professional she is, Marla rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She restructured their debt, negotiated with creditors, streamlined operations, and basically performed financial CPR on a company that was flatlining. She eliminated the bleeding from their failed ventures, refocused them on their core business, and created a realistic path back to profitability. And you know what? It worked. Within 6 months, the Holloway Group was back in the black. Within a year, they were actually turning a decent profit. Investors who had written them off started returning calls. Suppliers who had put them on cash-only terms started extending credit again. I was a hero. For about 5 minutes. Raymond shook my hand and called me a savior. Logan actually looked me in the eye when he thanked me. Hell, they even threw a little celebration dinner where Raymond gave a speech about how family always comes through in the end. But here's the thing about being the hero in someone else's story. Your starring role is usually pretty short-lived. Once the company was stable, once the money was flowing again, something funny happened. Suddenly, Raymond started talking about his strategic vision that had guided the turnaround. Logan began taking credit for the innovative restructuring that had saved the day. And my contribution? Well, that got downgraded to generous family support. It was like watching someone else take credit for a movie you wrote, directed, and financed. Except instead of getting upset about it, everyone expected me to smile and nod and be grateful I was allowed to participate. The worst part wasn't Raymond's ego or Logan's arrogance. The worst part was Camille. Every time I brought up how they were rewriting history, she'd give me that look. You know, the one that says, "Don't be difficult," and explain why I needed to let her father feel in control. "It's important for Dad's dignity," she'd say. "You know how proud he is. Just let him have this. Just let him have this." Like my $500,000 in months of work were just a participation trophy I should be happy to hand over. So I did what any reasonable person would do in that situation. I shut up. I played along. I smiled at family dinners while they talked about their brilliant business strategies. I nodded when they explained their amazing turnaround to friends and colleagues. I was the silent partner who had provided the cash and expertise to save their asses, and in return, I got to watch them take all the credit. Until that 3 a.m. text message reminded me exactly what my silence had bought me. Absolutely nothing. So here's where this whole clusterfuck really gets interesting, folks. The investors' party. Oh, excuse me, the celebration of excellence, as they called it on the fancy invitations, was supposed to be the crowning achievement of the Holloway Group's miraculous turnaround. And by miraculous, I mean the turnaround that happened because yours truly opened his wallet and saved their sorry asses from bankruptcy. Picture the most over-the-top, ego-stroking corporate circle jerk you can imagine, then multiply that by about 10. The Holloways had rented out the Skyview Ballroom, which, if you're not familiar with Houston's social scene, is basically where rich people go to remind each other how rich they are. We're talking about a venue that charges more for one night than most people make in 6 months. The guest list read like a who's who of Texas money and power. Politicians who probably couldn't find their own asses with both hands and a GPS, but who somehow managed to find their way to every major fundraiser in the state. Local billionaires who made their fortunes in oil and real estate, and now spent their time collecting art they didn't understand and wives they couldn't satisfy. B-list celebrities who were famous for being famous, the kind of people who show up to grocery store openings if there's a red carpet involved. And then there were the serious players, the investors, the business leaders, the people who could make or break companies with a single phone call. These were the folks Raymond was really trying to impress, the ones who could open doors and write checks and make the Holloway Group feel like they belonged at the big kids' table. It was going to be a night of champagne fountains and photo ops, of speeches about family values and business excellence, of handshakes and backslaps, and all the performative bullshit that passes for networking in corporate America. The kind of event where everyone pretends to be friends while quietly calculating how they can use each other. And guess whose name wasn't on the guest list? If you guessed Grayson Wells, the guy who literally saved the company from financial ruin, then congratulations, you win the prize for understanding just how fucked up this family really is. I found out about my exclusion in the most casual way possible, which somehow made it even more insulting. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking my morning coffee and scrolling through emails, when I came across the digital invitation that had been forwarded to me by mistake. Some assistant somewhere had screwed up and included me on a mass email about final preparations for the event. There it was, in beautiful script font, an evening of celebration, honoring the leadership and vision that transformed the Holloway Group. Below that was a list of confirmed attendees, organized by importance. Politicians at the top, major investors in the middle, family and key employees at the bottom. I scrolled through the whole damn thing twice, thinking maybe I'd missed my name somehow. Nope, not there, not anywhere. It was like I didn't exist, like the guy who had provided the financial lifeline that made this celebration possible was just some random stranger who had wandered into their story by accident. When I showed the list to Camille, she barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, that," she said, like we were talking about what to have for lunch. "It's just a formal event, Gray. Dad thinks it would look better if it's all Holloways. Just a formal event. Like it was some random Tuesday night dinner at Applebee's instead of the biggest celebration in the company's recent history." "After I saved your company?" I asked, and I could hear the edge in my own voice. "After I handed over more than $500,000 to keep you people from going under?" She finally looked up, and I could see that familiar expression creeping across her face. The one that said I was being unreasonable, that I was making a big deal out of nothing, that I should just smile and go along with whatever her family wanted. "It's not about what you did," she said, and Jesus Christ, the casual way she dismissed my contribution was like a slap in the face. "It's about optics. Dad wants this to be about the family's resilience, their ability to overcome challenges. Having you there would complicate the narrative. Complicate the narrative. Like my money and my effort and my expertise were just inconvenient plot holes in the story they wanted to tell about themselves. So what am I supposed to be?" I asked. "The anonymous benefactor? The guy who helped but doesn't get to take a bow?" She shrugged. Actually shrugged, like we were discussing the weather. "You know how Dad is about his pride. This is important to him." His pride. His fucking pride. The same pride that had nearly destroyed the company in the first place. The same pride that had prevented him from asking for help until it was almost too late. The same pride that apparently couldn't handle acknowledging that an outsider had saved his ass. That's when it really hit me, sitting there in my own kitchen, looking at my own wife dismissing my feelings like they were an inconvenience. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my name off their story. They had written me out of their narrative like I was some kind of embarrassing footnote that needed to be hidden away. In their version of events, the Holloway family had faced adversity and triumphed through their own strength and wisdom. Raymond's leadership had guided them through the storm. Logan's innovation had found new solutions. The family's unity had carried them through the dark times. And me? I was just some generous outsider who had happened to be around when they needed a loan. Not family, despite 7 years of marriage. Not a partner, despite my investment. Not even a friend worth inviting to the party. I was the hired help who had done his job and could now be quietly forgotten. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. These people had convinced me to liquidate my assets to save their company. They had accepted my money, my expertise, my CFO's time and effort. They had shaken my hand and called me a savior when they needed me. And now that they were back on their feet, now that the crisis was over and the company was profitable again, they wanted to pretend I had never existed. They wanted to celebrate their success without the inconvenient reminder that their success had been bought and paid for by someone who wasn't even good enough to get an invitation to the party. That night, I sat in my office and really looked at what I had become. I was the silent partner who stayed silent. The supportive husband who supported whatever his wife's family wanted. The generous benefactor who was expected to be generous without expecting anything in return. Not money, not credit, not even basic fucking respect. I had spent 7 years playing the role of the grateful outsider who was just happy to be included in the Holloway family drama. I had bitten my tongue when Raymond took credit for my ideas. I had smiled when Logan dismissed my suggestions. I had nodded along when they rewrote history to make themselves the heroes of their own story. And this was what it had bought me. A front row seat to watch them celebrate a success that wouldn't have been possible without me, while being told I wasn't important enough to attend the celebration. That's when I made a call to Marla. Because if the Holloway family thought they could just erase me from their story, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being forgotten and being dismissed. I want you to prepare everything, I told her. Everything? She asked, and I could hear the concern in her voice. Yes, I said, staring at that guest list with my name conspicuously absent. Let's remind them whose money bought their spotlight. Time to crash their party in the most spectacular way possible. You know what they say about keeping receipts? Well, turns out I'm basically the fucking Library of Congress when it comes to documentation. See, while the Holloway family was busy rewriting history and patting themselves on the back, I had been quietly doing what any smart businessman does, covering my ass with paper trails that would make the IRS weep with joy. For months, I had been collecting proof like some kind of obsessive-compulsive detective. Not because I was planning some elaborate revenge scheme from the beginning. I'm not that smart or that vindictive. No, I was just being careful because something about the whole situation had always felt off to me. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it the wisdom that comes from dealing with people who think they're smarter than they actually are. Every document, every email, every contract, every bank transfer, I had copies of everything. While Raymond and Logan were busy taking credit for the turnaround, I was busy making sure there was an undeniable record of exactly what had happened and who had done what. The wire transfer records were particularly beautiful in their simplicity. Black and white proof that on March 15, 2023, Grayson Wells had transferred $570,900 from his personal accounts to Holloway Group LLC. Not a loan, not an investment with specific terms, but a straight-up cash infusion to keep them from going under. The memo line on the transfer? Emergency operational funding. Emergency. As in, we're about to go tits up if someone doesn't save our asses right now. But that was just the appetizer. The real meat and potatoes were the contracts I had insisted on before handing over the money. Because despite what Camille and her family thought, I wasn't some lovesick puppy who would just throw money at problems without protecting myself. Those contracts, signed by Raymond himself, witnessed and notarized, gave me a 20% minority ownership stake in the Holloway Group. Not huge, but significant enough to have voting rights on major financial decisions. Significant enough to have a say in how the company was run. Significant enough to be a real partner, not just a silent benefactor. Raymond had signed those papers without even reading them carefully, because he was so desperate to get his hands on my money that he would have agreed to give me naming rights to his firstborn child. Just standard investor protection stuff, I had told him, and he had nodded and scribbled his signature like he was autographing a photo for a fan. But the real treasure trove was the email correspondence I had been quietly saving. You know how people think digital communication just disappears into the ether? Well, guess what? It doesn't. Every snarky comment, every dismissive remark, every moment of casual disrespect had been preserved for posterity in my carefully organized email folders. There was Logan's email to his father from last month. Gray's getting a little too comfortable thinking he has a say in company decisions. We need to remind him he's just the money guy. Just the money guy? The fucking money guy who had kept their company from becoming a cautionary tale in business school textbooks. And Camille's messages to Logan were even better. Dad's right about keeping Gray in the background. He means well, but he doesn't understand the family dynamics. It's easier if he just stays quiet and lets us handle the business side. Easier for who exactly? Easier for them to take credit for my work while treating me like hired help? But my personal favorite was the group text between Raymond, Logan, and Camille from 3 weeks ago, right after they had closed a major new contract. A contract that was only possible because of the financial stability I had provided. Raymond, great work today. This is what happens when the family works together. Logan, absolutely. We should celebrate. Family dinner this weekend. Camille, perfect. Just us. Gray's been working a lot anyway. Just us. The family. Because apparently after 7 years of marriage and over $500,000 invested in their company, I still wasn't really family. I was still the outsider who could be included or excluded based on their convenience. That night, sitting in my home office surrounded by boxes of documents and printouts of email exchanges, I opened a folder on my computer that I had been building for months. The folder was labeled Exit Strategy, and it contained everything I would need if I ever decided to stop playing nice. Financial records proving my investment, legal documents establishing my ownership stake, email evidence of their casual dismissal and disrespect. Everything was organized, cross-referenced, and ready to go. Because if there's one thing I learned in business, it's that information is power and documentation is insurance. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Camille. She was at some charity event with her mother, probably schmoozing with the same people who would be at the investors' party that I wasn't invited to. Don't be petty, the message read. It's just one night. Just one night. Like it was about the party itself and not about what the exclusion represented. Like it was about missing free champagne and rubber chicken dinner instead of being erased from the story of my own generosity. I stared at that message for a long time, thinking about all the times I had swallowed my pride, all the times I had stayed quiet, all the times I had let them diminish my contributions for the sake of family harmony. I thought about every "don't be difficult" and every "let dad feel in control," and every time I had been asked to make myself smaller so they could feel bigger. I didn't respond to her text. Instead, I closed the laptop and walked upstairs to our bedroom. I pulled out a suitcase, not a small overnight bag, but a real suitcase, the kind you use for extended trips. Because if the Holloway family thought they could just pretend I didn't exist, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being ignored and being gone. I wasn't planning to destroy them. I'm not a vindictive person by nature, and despite everything, I didn't want to see Camille's family business burn to the ground. But I was done being the silent partner. I was done being the grateful outsider. I was done letting them treat me like an inconvenience while they lived off the money I had provided. They wanted to celebrate their success without acknowledging my contribution? Fine. They could see how well they celebrated when I took my contribution and walked away. The contracts gave me rights they had forgotten about. The documentation proved claims they thought they could deny. And the legal system, for all its flaws, tends to side with the guy who has all the paperwork in order. As I started packing, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a sense of control. For too long, I had been reacting to their decisions, accommodating their wishes, adjusting my expectations to match their comfort level. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that my silence meant I was powerless. They had confused my patience with weakness, my generosity with stupidity. Tomorrow, they would learn the difference. The thread was about to be pulled, and their carefully constructed narrative was about to unravel in spectacular fashion. Picture this. The Skyview Ballroom is absolutely fucking spectacular. We're talking about a venue that looks like it was designed by someone who thought Versailles needed more bling. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hanging from a ceiling painted with some kind of Renaissance knockoff that probably cost more than most people's houses. Gold accents everywhere you look, because apparently subtlety is for poor people. The champagne fountains, plural, because one wasn't ostentatious enough, were flowing like the goddamn Niagara Falls. We're talking Dom Perignon, not some grocery store swill, because when you're celebrating your miraculous business turnaround, funded by someone you didn't invite, you go all out. The ice sculptures were carved into the shapes of oiled derricks and dollar signs, because nothing says Texas class like literal money symbols made of frozen water. And the people, Jesus Christ, the people. Every power player, social climber, and wannabe big shot in Houston had squeezed themselves into their finest designer threads. The women were dripping in jewelry that could fund small countries. The men were wearing watches that cost more than luxury cars, and everyone was air-kissing and fake-laughing like their lives depended on it. The photo ops were set up with golden backdrops featuring the Holloway Group logo blown up to movie poster size. Professional photographers were capturing every handshake, every smile, every moment that could be used later for marketing materials and social media posts. Because if you didn't Instagram your success, did it really happen? Raymond was in his element, holding court like some kind of business royalty. He'd traded his usual rumpled suit for a custom tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his smile was practiced and confident, and he was working the room like a politician running for office. Every few minutes, someone would approach him to offer congratulations, and he'd launch into his rehearsed speech about family values and strategic vision and weathering the storm through determination and leadership. Logan was right there beside him, playing the part of the heir apparent. Kid was practically glowing with pride, shaking hands, and accepting compliments like he had personally saved the company through his brilliant business acumen. He kept talking about innovative restructuring and forward-thinking strategies, using all the buzzwords he'd probably learned from whatever business podcast he listened to while pretending to work. And Camille? She looked absolutely stunning in a dress that probably cost more than my first car, playing the perfect daughter and supporting the family narrative with every gracious smile and humble nod. When people asked about the turnaround, she'd get this look of proud admiration and talk about how her father and brother had always found a way to overcome challenges. The whole thing was like watching a perfectly choreographed performance. Everyone knew their roles, everyone hit their marks, and everyone was committed to selling the story of the Holloway family's triumphant comeback through their own grit and determination. There was just one tiny problem with their beautiful narrative. The guy who had actually made it all possible wasn't there to enjoy the show. I wasn't at the party, folks. While they were toasting their success with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month, I was 30,000 feet in the air, flying first class to Portugal and sipping airline coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through gym socks. But just because I wasn't there doesn't mean I wasn't represented. See, I had sent someone in my place. Someone who didn't give a shit about family dynamics or social niceties or maintaining the carefully constructed fiction that the Holloway family had saved themselves. Her name was Sienna Rodriguez, and she was my attorney. Not just any attorney. We're talking about a legal shark who could smell bullshit from 3 counties away and had a reputation for eating corporate executives for breakfast. She specialized in business law, contract disputes, and generally making rich people very uncomfortable when they tried to screw over the people who had helped them. Sienna showed up to that party dressed to kill in a tailored black suit that screamed, "I'm here on business, and your business is about to become my business." She walked into that golden palace of self-congratulation like she owned the place, carrying a leather briefcase that contained enough legal firepower to level a small city. The timing was absolutely perfect. At exactly 8:15 p.m., right when the party was hitting its stride and everyone was sufficiently lubricated with expensive champagne, right before Logan was scheduled to take the stage to give his big speech about family strength and overcoming adversity, Sienna made her entrance. She walked straight through that crowd of Texas elite like Moses parting the Red Sea. People instinctively moved out of her way, sensing that this was not someone you wanted to accidentally bump into while holding a champagne flute. She had that aura that lawyers develop after years of practice, the kind of presence that makes guilty people start sweating even when they don't know what they're guilty of. And then, in front of God and everyone who mattered in Houston society, she started handing out legal envelopes like she was delivering Christmas presents. Except these weren't the kind of presents anyone wanted to receive. The first envelope went to Raymond, who was in the middle of explaining to some oil executive how his strategic leadership had turned the company around. Sienna walked right up to him, interrupted his conversation, and placed the envelope directly in his hands with a smile that could have frozen hellfire. "Mr. Holloway," she said in a voice that carried just far enough for nearby guests to hear, "you've been served." The second envelope went to Logan, who was posing for photos with some local politicians. Sienna tapped him on the shoulder, waited for him to turn around, and handed him his package with the same professional courtesy you'd use to deliver a pizza. "Mr. Logan Holloway," she announced, "legal documentation for your review." But the third envelope, that one was special. That one went to Camille, who was chatting with some society wives about the family's amazing recovery. Sienna approached her with the same businesslike efficiency, but when she handed over the envelope, she leaned in close enough to whisper something that made all the color drain from Camille's face. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the three most important members of the Holloway family stood there holding legal documents, their confident smiles replaced by expressions of growing horror as they realized what they were looking at. Inside those envelopes was everything they had tried to forget, everything they had hoped would stay buried under their narrative of family triumph. A formal buyout notice, triggering my rights as a 20% owner of the company. A detailed accounting of all outstanding debts, including interest on the money I had provided. A revised ownership chart showing exactly how much voting power I now held over major financial decisions. And best of all, a complete breakdown of the legal consequences if they tried to dispute any of it. Their party didn't end with fireworks and congratulations. It ended with the three most powerful people in the room standing there like deer in headlights, watching their carefully constructed celebration crumble in real time. Because sometimes, the best way to crash a party is to remind everyone exactly who paid for it. By the time the Holloway family's golden celebration was imploding like a controlled demolition, I was 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, sipping what had to be the world's most expensive airline whiskey and watching the sun set through a first-class window that cost me more than most people's monthly rent. Let me tell you something about flying first class when you're having the best revenge of your life. It hits different. The leather seats feel softer, the service feels more attentive, and even the peanuts taste like they've been blessed by angels. Or maybe that was just the satisfaction of knowing that while I was being treated like royalty at cruising altitude, the Holloway family was dealing with legal documents that were about to turn their world upside down. Lisbon wasn't a random choice, by the way. I could have gone anywhere, Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, hell, even Vegas would have been entertaining. But Portugal called to me for reasons I couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the promise of anonymity in a place where nobody knew my name or my history with the Holloway Group. Maybe it was the idea of sitting on ancient cobblestones in a city that had seen empires rise and fall, putting my own little drama into perspective. Or maybe I just wanted to be somewhere that felt as far away from Houston as possible, both geographically and culturally. The flight was long enough for me to really process what I had just done. 12 hours of uninterrupted thinking time, with no phone calls from angry in-laws, no text messages from my wife asking me to be reasonable, no distractions from the nuclear bomb I had just dropped on their perfectly orchestrated celebration. I kept imagining the scene at the Skyview Ballroom. Raymond's face when he opened that envelope and realized that his silent partner had just become very, very loud. Logan's confusion as he tried to understand legal documents that were way above his pay grade. And Camille, God, Camille probably thought she could smooth this over with the right words and the right apologies. Like this was just another family disagreement that could be solved with dinner and diplomacy. They had no idea what was coming. By the time I landed in Lisbon, it was early morning, and the city was just waking up. I took a taxi from the airport through streets that looked like they had been designed by someone who understood that beauty didn't have to be ostentatious. No golden chandeliers or marble columns, just elegant simplicity that had been refined over centuries. My hotel was in the Chiato district, one of those boutique places that probably cost a fortune but felt more like staying in a wealthy friend's guest room than a commercial establishment. The kind of place where the staff remembered your name after one conversation and the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead. I had booked a room with a balcony that overlooked the city, and that first morning, standing there with a cup of Portuguese coffee that made American coffee taste like dirty water, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The view was incredible. Red-tiled rooftops stretching out toward the Tagus River, church bells ringing in the distance, people starting their day without any awareness that some asshole from Texas was having an existential crisis 30 feet above their heads. The morning light had this golden quality that made everything look like a painting, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about business or family drama or the complicated mess my life had become. I was just breathing. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I landed. Missed calls, text messages, voicemails that I wasn't ready to listen to. But I had turned off all notifications except for messages from Marla, because she was the only person whose updates I actually wanted to receive. Around 10 a.m. local time, she sent me a text that made me smile for the first time in weeks. They're freaking out. Logan tried calling an emergency board meeting, but you own the deciding vote now. Raymond's been locked in his office since this morning. Camille's called me 6 times asking where you are. This is better than Netflix. I replied with a smiley face emoji and set the phone down on the small table next to my coffee cup. For years, I had been playing the role of the patient son-in-law. The guy who helped when asked, who stayed quiet when ignored, who smiled and nodded when his contributions were dismissed or forgotten. I had been the supporting character in someone else's story, always accommodating, always understanding, always putting their comfort ahead of my own dignity. But sitting on that balcony, watching strangers live their lives in a city that didn't know or care about my problems, I realized something important. I had been reclaiming my voice, and it felt fucking fantastic. The Holloway family had spent so long treating me like furniture that they had forgotten I was actually a person with feelings, opinions, and legal rights. They had gotten so comfortable with my silence that they assumed it would last forever. Well, surprise, motherfuckers. Furniture doesn't usually fight back, but people do. I spent the next few hours just wandering through the city like a tourist, which I guess I technically was. I walked through the Ratio Square, where the cobblestone patterns looked like waves frozen in time. I took the famous tram 28 through neighborhoods that felt like they had been preserved in amber since the 1940s. I ate lunch at a tiny restaurant where the owner didn't speak English and I didn't speak Portuguese, but we managed to communicate through gestures and smiles. It was amazing how liberating it felt to be completely anonymous. Nobody knew I was the guy who had saved a failing company. Nobody cared about my family drama or my business accomplishments. I was just another American tourist with a good camera and comfortable walking shoes. For the first time in months, I wasn't Grayson Wells, the generous benefactor who had been written out of his own story. I wasn't the silent partner who stayed silent. I wasn't the husband who accommodated his wife's family at the expense of his own self-respect. I was just me, sitting in a cafe in a foreign country, drinking wine that cost less than a Houston cocktail and tasted better than anything I had consumed in years. My phone buzzed again around dinner time. Another message from Marla. Update. Camille's on a plane to Lisbon. Flight lands tomorrow afternoon. She's apparently coming to fix this. Thought you should know. I laughed out loud, probably startling the elderly Portuguese couple at the next table. Of course Camille thought she could fix this. Of course she believed that the right combination of words and tears and appeals to our marriage could make me forget 7 years of being treated like a second-class citizen in her family. She had no idea that I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was what I had felt at 3 a.m. when I got that text message excluding me from their party. Anger was what had driven me to call Sienna and set this whole thing in motion. What I felt now was something much more dangerous, clarity. I could see my situation with perfect, crystalline clarity for the first time in years. I could see how I had been manipulated, dismissed, and taken for granted. I could see how my generosity had been exploited and my silence had been assumed. And I could see exactly what needed to happen next. Tomorrow, when Camille arrived with her apologies and explanations and promises that things would be different, she would find a different Grayson Wells than the one she had left behind in Houston. She would find someone who was no longer willing to be the silent partner in his own life. I knew she was coming before I saw her. There's something about the way your wife walks that you recognize even across a crowded hotel lobby, even when you're not expecting to see her, even when you're sitting in a Portuguese cafe 3,000 miles from home, trying to pretend your marriage isn't falling apart in real time. Camille looked like hell, which was saying something because this is a woman who considers leaving the house without perfect makeup to be a minor crime against humanity. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her designer clothes were wrinkled like she'd slept in them on the plane, and she had that hollow-eyed look that comes from crying at 30,000 feet while surrounded by strangers. She found me at the same outdoor cafe where I'd been having my morning coffee for the past 3 days, the one with the perfect view of the Tagus River and the kind of strong Portuguese coffee that could wake the dead. I was reading a local newspaper that I couldn't understand and eating pastéis de nata that were better than anything I'd ever tasted in Texas. "I didn't know you'd actually go through with it," she said, sliding into the chair across from me without being invited. Her voice was barely above a whisper, like she was afraid someone might overhear our private drama. I looked up from my newspaper, which, let's be honest, I was only pretending to read anyway, and really studied my wife's face. This was the woman I had fallen in love with 7 years ago, the woman I had married in a ceremony that cost more than most people's houses, the woman whose family I had saved from financial ruin with my own money. And she looked absolutely devastated. "I always go through with what I say," I replied, keeping my voice calm and even. "That's the difference between us, Camille. When I make a commitment, I honor it. When I say something, I mean it." The dig wasn't subtle, and she caught it immediately. Her eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, but mostly just looked like exhaustion. "They're humiliated," she whispered, glancing around like she was afraid someone in this Portuguese cafe might recognize us and report back to Houston Society pages. "The whole party just fell apart. People are talking. The investors are asking questions. Dad hasn't left his office since Tuesday." Good, I thought, but I didn't say it out loud. Instead, I took another sip of my coffee and waited for her to continue. Because this conversation was going to happen on my terms, not hers. For 7 years, I had been reactive, accommodating, always ready to smooth things over for the sake of family harmony. But sitting in this cafe, with an ocean between me and their drama, I felt no obligation to make this easier for her. "I was humiliated when your father thanked himself for my work," I said calmly, cutting off whatever excuse she was about to offer. "I was humiliated when Logan took credit for the financial restructuring that my CFO designed. I was humiliated when you all decided I wasn't worth inviting to celebrate the success that I literally paid for." She flinched like I had slapped her. I didn't know what to say. "Then you said nothing. That was your choice. And that was the crux of it, wasn't it? For months, I had been waiting for someone, anyone, in that family to acknowledge what I had done for them. Not necessarily public credit, not a parade in my honor, but just basic recognition that the guy who had saved their asses deserved a little respect. Instead, I got silence. From Raymond, who rewrote history to make himself the hero. From Logan, who acted like his brilliant leadership had saved the day. And most painfully, from Camille, who chose her family's comfort over her husband's dignity every single time. I didn't know what to say," she repeated, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. Dad was so proud of how he handled the crisis. Logan was finally feeling confident about his role in the company. The whole family was happy for the first time in years. "I didn't want to." "You didn't want to what?" I interrupted. "You didn't want to remind them that their happiness was built on someone else's sacrifice? You didn't want to complicate their narrative with inconvenient facts." She was crying now, not the elegant tears of a woman who knows how to cry prettily, but the ugly, honest sobs of someone whose world was falling apart. Other cafe patrons were starting to stare, but I found I didn't give a shit about making a scene anymore. "But I love you," she whispered, like those 3 words were supposed to fix everything. Like love was a magic wand that could erase months of disrespect and dismissal. "I believe that," I said, and I meant it. I did believe she loved me, in her way. But I had finally realized that her way wasn't enough anymore. But love without respect? That's pity. And I don't want pity. She looked at me like I had just spoken in a foreign language. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you love me the way you'd love a loyal dog," I explained, surprised by how calm I felt while saying words that were probably ending my marriage. "You appreciate that I'm there. You're glad I'm helpful. You enjoy the benefits I provide. But you don't see me as an equal. You don't see me as someone whose feelings matter as much as your father's pride or your brother's confidence." "That's not true," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? When was the last time you defended me to your family? When was the last time you put my feelings before their comfort? When was the last time you treated me like a partner instead of a resource? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Because we both knew the answer was never. In 7 years of marriage, she had never once chosen me over them. Your family needed saving, and I saved them. I continued. Your father needed his pride intact, so you protected his pride. Logan needed to feel important, so you supported his delusions. But what about what I needed? What about my need to be respected by the people I had helped? What about my need to be treated like family instead of like hired help? We do treat you like family, she said weakly. No, you don't. You treat me like a generous outsider who should be grateful for the privilege of helping you. You treat me like someone whose contributions don't really count because I'm not a real Holloway. She was sobbing now, the kind of crying that makes your whole body shake. Is there still a way forward? She asked between gasps. I looked at this woman I had loved for 7 years, this woman whose family I had saved, this woman who had just asked if our marriage could survive her choosing them over me for the 1000th time. There might be, I told her, because despite everything, I wasn't ready to give up completely. But it won't be on their terms anymore. What does that mean? It means that if you want this to work, you're going to have to choose. Really choose. Not the careful balancing act you've been doing for 7 years. Not the diplomatic non-answers that protect everyone's feelings. You're going to have to decide whether you're married to me or to your family's expectations. She stared at me across the small cafe table, mascara running down her cheeks, looking like a woman who had just realized that the ground beneath her feet wasn't as solid as she thought. And if I choose wrong, she whispered, then you'll find out what life looks like without the safety net I've been providing, I said. Because I'm done being taken for granted. I'm done being the silent partner. I'm done pretending that love is enough when it comes without respect. For the first time in our relationship, Camille was seeing the real cost of her choices. And judging by the look on her face, she was finally starting to understand that some prices are too high to pay. Logan resigned 2 weeks later like a coward abandoning a sinking ship. Turns out when you can't take credit for other people's work anymore, actually running a business becomes pretty fucking difficult. Who would have thought? The resignation email was a masterpiece of corporate bullshit. Something about pursuing new opportunities and strategic career transitions. Translation. He finally realized he was in way over his head and decided to bail before I could expose just how incompetent he really was. But Logan jumping ship was just the appetizer. The main course was watching their biggest investor, Mr. Farley, back out faster than a teenager on prom night. Apparently, when you discover that a company's miraculous turnaround was actually funded by some guy they didn't even invite to their celebration party, it raises what we in the business world call red flags. Farley's withdrawal wasn't quiet either. He made sure everyone in their investor circle knew exactly why he was pulling his money. Nothing kills business confidence quite like the story of ungrateful assholes biting the hand that literally fed them. Raymond's health started declining from stress, which honestly wasn't surprising. The man had spent decades believing his own hype, and reality has a way of hitting people like a freight train when they least expect it. Camille called again, her voice shaky. My family is falling apart. They did it to themselves, I told her matter-of-factly. And you helped. But I love you, she whispered, like love was some kind of magic spell that could undo months of disrespect. I believe that, I said. But love without respect? That's pity. And I don't want pity. She asked if there was still a way forward, her voice barely audible. There might be, I told her, watching the Lisbon sunset from my hotel balcony. But it won't be on their terms anymore. The Holloway empire was crumbling, and for the first time in years, I felt absolutely no obligation to help them pick up the pieces. Back in Houston, I scheduled a meeting at my firm because if we were going to have this conversation, it was happening on my turf for once. My office, my rules, my terms. Camille arrived first, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Good. Maybe sleepless nights would give her some perspective on what respect actually meant. Then came Raymond, thinner, quieter, looking like a man who'd finally realized that pride doesn't pay the bills. The mighty patriarch reduced to showing up hat in hand at his son-in-law's office. How the mighty had fallen. Logan never showed. Probably still pursuing new opportunities somewhere far away from the mess he'd helped create. I handed them 3 options, printed out in black and white, because I was done with verbal agreements and family promises that meant nothing. Option 1. They buy me out, fully and fairly. Clean break. No hard feelings. We all go our separate ways. Option 2. We restructure. I stay, but with complete oversight and veto power over major decisions. No more family meetings I'm not invited to. No more credit taking for my work. Option 3. I walk and take my influence, my tech network, and my clients with me. Let's see how well they do when I'm actually gone instead of just ignored. Raymond looked at me with something that might have been respect for the first time in 7 years. I thought you were just the quiet guy with the checkbook. No, I said, leaning back in my chair like the boss I'd always been but they'd never acknowledged. I'm the man who kept you afloat while you all danced on the deck. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. For once, they were the ones waiting for my decision instead of the other way around. Finally, Raymond spoke. We choose option 2. Smart man. Too bad it took losing everything for him to figure that out. They chose option 2, which honestly was the smartest decision the Holloway family had made in years. Not that they had much choice, considering their alternatives were bankruptcy or complete humiliation. But hey, I'll give credit where credit is due. The restructuring wasn't pretty. Raymond retired 6 months later, not in some grand ceremony with golden handshakes and speeches about legacy, but quietly, like a man who finally understood that his time was over. He moved to a smaller house, sold the yacht he could never really afford, and started spending his days playing golf with other former executives who'd learned the hard way that pride doesn't pay for retirement. Logan? That little shit moved to Miami faster than you could say nepotism, probably telling people at South Beach bars about how he used to run a major logistics company before deciding to explore other opportunities. Translation: he ran away before anyone could figure out just how useless he really was. Last I heard, he was trying to become some kind of social media influencer, which is perfect because it's the only job where being completely out of touch with reality is actually an asset. But the real story here isn't about Raymond's bruised ego or Logan's escape to Florida. The real story is about Camille and me, and whether two people can rebuild a marriage after one of them finally stops being a doormat. It's been slow going, I'll be honest. You can't erase 7 years of being treated like furniture with a few apologies and promises to do better. Trust isn't like a light switch. You can't just flip it back on after someone has spent years demonstrating that your feelings don't matter to them. But Camille surprised me. I thought she'd choose her family. Thought she'd find some way to blame me for destroying their perfect little narrative. Instead, she did something I'd never seen her do before. She stood up to them. When Raymond tried to guilt-trip her about family loyalty, she told him that loyalty works both ways. When Logan called from Miami whining about how I'd ruined everything, she hung up on him. When her mother suggested that maybe I was being too harsh, Camille actually defended me. It was like watching someone discover they had a spine after years of thinking they were invertebrate. We're still rebuilding, slowly, carefully, like people learning to trust each other for the first time. We go to couples therapy now, which is something the old Camille would have refused because airing dirty laundry wasn't the Holloway way. But the new Camille, the one who's learning to be her own person instead of just her father's daughter, actually listens when the therapist talks about respect and equality in relationships. The company is doing well under my oversight. Turns out when you remove the ego-driven decision-making and focus on what actually works, businesses tend to prosper. Who could have predicted that? We've landed 3 major new contracts in the past year, expanded into 2 new markets, and our profit margins are the best they've been since before Raymond started his diversification adventure. And yes, my name is on everything now. Every major decision goes through me. Every strategic plan has my signature on it. Every success story mentions my contribution, not as some footnote or family support, but as a key player who helped make it happen. It feels good to be visible again. But here's the thing that really matters. I learned something about myself through all this chaos. I learned that I had been living as a supporting character in my own life, always accommodating, always understanding, always putting other people's comfort ahead of my own dignity. For years, I told myself I was being mature, being the bigger person, being a good husband and son-in-law. But really, I was just being a coward. I was so afraid of conflict, so desperate to be liked and accepted, that I let people walk all over me while convincing myself it was noble. That 3 a.m. text message didn't break me. It freed me. It showed me exactly how little they valued my contributions, how easily they could dismiss my efforts, how comfortable they were with treating me like hired help. And their casual disrespect gave me something I'd been missing for years: clarity. Sometimes, people only see your worth when they realize you're gone. Sometimes, the only way to get respect is to stop accepting anything less. Sometimes, you have to be willing to lose everything to find out what's actually worth keeping. To anyone who's ever been taken for granted, who's ever been the generous one that everyone expects to just keep giving without getting anything back, who's ever been told to be reasonable, when what they really mean is shut up and let us use you, this story is for you. The moment you stop being quiet is the moment you start being heard. The moment you stop accepting crumbs is the moment people realize they need to offer you a real seat at the table. The moment you stop being afraid of conflict is the moment you start living as the main character in your own story. And that 3 a.m. text message from Raymond? I still have it saved on my phone, not because I'm holding a grudge, but because it reminds me of something important. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened, because it forces you to finally stand up for yourself. Game over, Holloways. I won.